Hi, everybody. My name is Melanie Keller, and I am the Associate Artistic Director of First Folio Theater. And I am here today with David Rice, who is the co-founder and Executive Director of First Folio Theater, which is in residence at the Mays Lake Peabody Estate in Oak Brook, Illinois. And David is also the playwright of The Madness of Edgar Allan Poe, a love story. And so we're going to talk with David today a little bit about his play. Hi, David.
Hello, Melanie. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you first to tell me a little bit about the genesis of The Madness of Edgar Allan Poe, a love story. How did it come to be?
Well, back in 2005, early in 2005, my late wife, Allison C. Vesely, who co-founded the theater with me, and I were trying to find a good show to do in the upcoming season. And we really wanted to do something about Edgar Allan Poe. And we could not find a script that we liked. We had read well over a dozen of them. And one night we were sitting in her den and I was reading the latest one and it was just dreadful. And I tossed it in the air and said, "Oh my gosh, this is horrible. I could write a better play than this." And Allison turned to me and said, "I've been waiting for you to realize that. Yes, would you just stop complaining and write the play that we want to produce?" And that's how it happened, and that's how I wrote my first play.
And so I know that, so you said the first production of Poe was in 2005. It has subsequently been produced at First Folio, I think, 6 times, and it's also been produced once by the Oak Park Festival Theater. It is so popular. Can you tell me, in your opinion, what is it that our audiences love so much about the show, and why do they come back again and again to see it?
It's a combination of factors. The first one is that Poe has a very special place in the American psyche. People often refer to him as the American Shakespeare. And everybody knows something about Edgar Allan Poe. Everybody is a little bit creeped out by the thought of Edgar Allan Poe and some of his stories. And especially here in the United States, most of us enjoy, especially at Halloween time, which is when we tend to produce the show, scary tales, ghost stories, stories of people rising from the dead or being buried alive. Those meet that need that we seem to have for something spooky, eerie, haunting. But at the same time, one of the most amazing things about Poe is the element of romance that he works into so many of his stories. And that duality, which would almost seem to be in conflict and yet isn't the way that he creates it, is a great part of what makes him so appealing to us now, more than 180 years after his death.
Let me actually ask you a question about that. So you call the play The Madness of Edgar Allan Poe a love story. Why do you call it that? There's obviously some theme that you've drawn on to unite all these stories and poems. Tell me about that.
When I started crafting the show, again, along with my wife, Allison, we conceived it as a show that would pull in a variety of Poe's short stories and poems. And that would also be what we call a site-specific show, a show that would move from room to room within the Mays Lake Peabody Estate mansion, and that different stories would be reenacted, dramatized, as it were, in each different room. But what I was missing when we first conceived of it, knew that I had to find, was that thread that held it together. We didn't want it to just be an evening of short stories and poems. There needed to be something that happened that tied all of this together. And again, I give credit where credit is due. One night while I was working and trying to figure this out, I was talking to my daughter, Haley Rice, and Haley said to me, "Do you have a title for it yet?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I think I'm going to call it The Madness of Edgar Allan Poe." And she, being the lovable, smart aleck that she is, said, "Oh, a love story." And I swear to God, it was one of those cartoon moments, and the light bulb went bing on top of my head. And I said, "That's it. That's what I've been leaving out, is the love story." And she laughed and she said, "Well, I'm glad I didn't say, oh, the musical." But that truly was the genesis of that part of it, was the realization that this is what tied everything together and also helps us understand Poe and what his fascination with the macabre was, because his wife died at a very young age. He married her at 13. She died in her mid 20s of this disease called, well, we call it tuberculosis. They called it consumption back then. It was the same disease that killed his mother when Poe was very young, and killed his stepmother. It also killed his brother. And it's a disease that is marked by coughing up blood. And so that dual horror of everyone he loved being taken by this disease that produces blood is revealed over and over again in short stories and poems. Is the love, the loss, the blood, it's all together. And I think it's all an element of his lack of love, his lack of security in love, his whole life.
Mm-hmm. That is so interesting. So speaking of the variety of the stories and the poems that you have woven into your play, I know that you've got, let me see if I can remember them all. You tell me if I'm wrong. I know you've got the bells, and you've got either the whole poem, the whole story, or sort of pieces of some story. So you've got the bells, the raven, the telltale heart, the pit and the pendulum, Lygia, and the mask of the red death. Is that all the Poe? And then there is some David Rice woven into this. Specifically, you've written a scene featuring his wife, Virginia, called Virginia's Tea. He gets to speak with the audience. But one of my favorite characters is that of the policeman that you've written into, sort of written into, the Telltale Heart. So can you tell me a little bit about him and what his role is?
Sure. The interpolation of the policeman's lines into my adaptation of the Telltale Heart is an excellent example of what an adapter has to do when he takes a piece of dramatic literature and translates it, or excuse me, a piece of literature and translates it into a piece of drama. Mm-hmm. In the original story, I believe Poe says something about, in the narrator's voice, the policeman nattered on. And then the narrator keeps talking about what he's hearing, about what he's experiencing, what he's thinking. But all we know is that the policeman is nattering on in the background. But of course, in a play, the playwright has to decide, what is it that the policeman is saying? What are those natterings about? And so I had to decide what kind of a policeman this was, and I came up with the decision that he was a little bit clueless and a very nice guy. He's a very happy-go-lucky, really wants to help people out, which is also, of course, why he's so easily fooled by these really weak excuses that the narrator gives, because he's the kind of guy who just wants to believe the best about everybody. Mm-hmm. And so I had to decide what it was that the policeman was talking about and what tale he was telling before the madman reveals himself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's so effective and really so funny, which is great when you have so much that is so macabre. To bring a level of humor into it, it's really enjoyable.
And that's a lesson that I learned from my years of doing and studying and producing Shakespeare. Shakespeare knew that you cannot have unrelenting drama. You have to give your audience a break. You have to give them a release. All right. And that's exactly what I was hoping that the character of the policeman would do, would give the audience a chance to let out, even if it was nervous laughter, let out some laughter and give them that, you know, that chance to let down a little bit and let go a little bit of that tension before it builds again in the very next moment. Yeah. And that also, of course, is another dramatic device that playwrights will use, is you don't want just a constant, consistent upward rise. You want the roller coaster. You want the tension, and then it's released. And then tension goes a little higher and it's released. And then we come to the ultimate tension and the climax, and then we get the final release. And that is usually so much more effective.
Absolutely. So I guess my last question then is, why do you think Edgar Allan Poe's poems and stories, his words, are still relevant and powerful for readers and audiences today?
I think it's for the exact same reason that Shakespeare's works are still relevant and fascinating to readers and viewers today. Because like Shakespeare, Poe was writing about universal experiences. He wasn't writing just about something that happened in the early 19th century in the United States. He was writing about love and loss and fear, and all of those things are the very experiences, the very emotions that we all experience today and that people experience around the world. He is, I believe, the single most popular American author worldwide, the way that Shakespeare is the most popular British author worldwide. And again, it's because they wrote about experiences that we all have and wrote in a way that we can personalize today, you know, more than a century after his death and centuries after Shakespeare's.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you so much, David. That's all really, really interesting. I appreciate you taking a little bit of time to chat today. And I can't wait until we can get back into producing The Madness of Edgar Allan Poe, a love story.
Thank you so much for inviting me.